This is Secular Founding Period History, and my name is Tony Messina. And welcome to another presentation of America's Lost History and the Second Amendment. Second Amendment origins in constitutional language, 1776 to 1791, by Tony Messina. Second Amendment, 1776-1791. All rights are subject to discretion equally. The first thing to say about the Second Amendment is that, independent of the clause, the inherent right to possess and own your own gun outright in your state and or own your own land is incontrovertible. Next, there is no relationship between the right of private gun ownership and the federal Constitution. The Second Amendment does not grant gun rights, nor speak to the concept of private gun ownership by the people. Private gun ownership would be a people-oriented right under the authority of the state governments in those days, as the people were not citizens of the federal government. It's no doubt a citizen's inherent right, just as all other rights are equally inherent. Nothing can possibly change that, short of your government officials throwing your country away to a dictator or something of that nature. However, as with all rights that are inherent in a civil society, depending on the time one lives in and the generation they are a part of, it's the supreme will of the majority of the people as to whether or not one maintains an absolute inherent right to keep and possess a gun as one might wish, as this rule goes with all rights. In a democracy or in a social arrangement wherein the will of the majority stands, all things are subject to the discretion of the will of the majority. It's also called the inalienable right of self-determination, and thus the right of the majority of the people of any generation to alter or abolish all laws and or government and institute new laws or government based on the will of the majority. What follows is a listing of all the references of anything having to do with arms in the debates, letters, writings, constitutions, or otherwise. Thomas Jefferson's Fair Copy Constitution, first recorded mention. Constitutional draft, early 1776, not adopted. No freeman shall be debarred the use of arms within his own lands. Constitution of Virginia, 1776, that a well-regulated militia composed of the body of the people trained to arms is the proper, natural, and safe defense of a free state, that standing armies in times of peace should be avoided as dangerous to liberty, and that in all cases the military should be under strict subordination to and governed by the civil power. Constitution of Pennsylvania, 1776, that the people have a right to bear arms for the defense of themselves and the state, and as standing armies in the time of peace are dangerous to liberty, they ought not to be kept up, and that the military should be kept under strict subordination to and governed by the civil power. Hunting on own land. Constitution of North Carolina, 1776, that the people have a right to bear arms for the defense of the state, and as standing armies in times of peace are dangerous to liberty, they ought not to be kept up, and that the military should be kept under strict subordination to and governed by the civil power. Constitution of Maryland, 1776, that a well-regulated militia is the proper and natural defense of a free government. Constitution of New York, 1777, and whereas it is the utmost importance to the safety of every state that it should always be in a condition of defense, and it is the duty of every man who enjoys the protection of society to be prepared and willing to defend it, this convention, therefore, in the name and by the authority of the good people of this state, do ordain, determine, and declare that the militia of this state at all times hereafter, as well in peace as in war, shall be armed and disciplined and in readiness for service. that all such of the inhabitants of this state, being of the people called Quakers, as from scruples of conscience may be averse to the bearing of arms, be therefrom excused by the legislature, and do pay to the state such sums of money in lieu of their personal service as the same may, in the judgment of the legislature, be worth, and that a proper magazine of warlike stores proportionate to the number of inhabitants be forever hereafter at the expense of this state and by acts of the legislature established, maintained, and continued in every county in this state. This exemption fee was fixed at 10 lire per annum by the Act of April 3, 1778, organizing the militia of the state. Constitution of Massachusetts, 1780. The people have a right to keep and to bear arms for the common defense, and as in time of peace armies are dangerous to liberty, they ought not to be maintained without the consent of the legislature, and the military power shall always be held in an exact subordination to the civil authority, and be governed by it. Constitution of New Hampshire, 1784. No person who is conscientiously scrupulous about the lawfulness of bearing arms shall be compelled thereunto, provided he will pay an equivalent. A well-regulated militia is the proper, natural, and sure defense of a state. Articles of Confederation, March 1, 1781. Nor shall any body of forces be kept up by any state in time of peace, except such number only as in the judgment of the United States in Congress assembled shall be deemed requisite to garrison the forts necessary for the defense of such state. But every state shall always keep up a well-regulated and disciplined militia sufficiently armed and accoutred, and shall provide and constantly have ready for use in public stores a due number of field pieces and tents, and a proper quantity of arms, ammunition, and camp equipage. To agree upon the number of land forces, and to make requisitions for each state for its quota in proportion to the number of white inhabitants in each state, which requisition shall be binding, and thereupon the legislature of each state shall appoint the regimental officers, raise the men, and clothe, arm, and equip them in a solid-like manner at the expense of the United States, and the officers and men so clothed, armed, and equipped shall march to the place appointed, and within the time agreed on by the United States in Congress assembled. Federal Constitution, 1787, Article 1, Section 8, Clause 12. To raise and support armies, but no appropriation of money to that use shall be for a longer term than 2 years. Number 13, to provide and maintain a navy. Number 14, to make rules for the government and regulations of the land and naval forces. Number 15, to provide for calling forth the militia to execute the laws of the Union, suppress insurrections, and repel invasions. Number 16, to provide for organizing, arming, and disciplining the militia, and for governing such part of them as may be employed in the service of the United States, reserving to the states respectively the appointment of the officers and the authority of training the military according to the discipline prescribed by Congress. Creating the Bill of Rights, 1789, House of Representatives, Virginia Convention, June 27, 1788. 17th, that the people have a right to keep and bear arms, that a well-regulated militia composed of the body of the people trained to arms is the proper, natural, and safe defense of a free state. 19th, that any person religiously scrupulous of bearing arms ought to be exempt upon payment of an equivalent to employ another to bear arms in his stead. Madison Resolutions, June 8, 1789. The right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. A well-armed and well-regulated militia being the best security of a free country, but no person religiously scrupulous of bearing arms shall be compelled to render military service in person. House Committee Report, July 28, 1789. A well-regulated militia composed of the body of the people, being the best security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed, but no person religiously scrupulous shall be compelled to bear arms. Creating the Bill of Rights, 1789. The Senate. On September 4, the Senate agreed to amend Article 5 to read as follows: A well-regulated militia being the best security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. On September 9, the Senate replaced the best with necessary to read, a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Articles of Amendment, as agreed to by the Senate, September 14, 1789, a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Newspaper articles of the debates. Congressional Register, 17 August 1789. The House went into a committee of the whole. The subject of amendments was taken into consideration as follows: A well-regulated militia composed of the body of the people, being the best security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed, but no person religiously scrupulous shall be compelled to bear arms. Mr. Gary: This clause would be an opportunity to the people in power to destroy the Constitution itself. They can declare who are those religiously scrupulous and prevent them from bearing arms. What, sir, is the use of a militia? It is to prevent the establishment of a standing army, the bane of liberty. Now it must be evident that under this provision, together with their own powers, Congress could take such measures with respect to a militia as make a standing army necessary. Whenever the government means to invade the rights and liberties of the people, they always attempt to destroy the militia, in order to raise an arm upon their ruins. This was done by Great Britain. He wished the words to be altered so as to be confined to belonging to a religious sect, scrupulous of bearing arms. Mr. Jackson did not expect that all the people in the United States would turn Quakers or Moravians. Consequently, one part would have to defend the other in case of invasion. Now this, in his opinion, was unjust, unless the Constitution secured an equivalent. For this reason, he moved to amend the clause by inserting at the end of it, upon paying an equivalent to be established by law. Mr. Smith, he thought they were to be excused provided they found a substitute. Mr. Jackson was willing to accommodate. He thought the expression was, no one religiously scrupulous of bearing arms shall be compelled to render military service in person upon paying an equivalent. Mr. Sherman conceived it difficult to modify the clause and make it better. It is well known that those who are religiously scrupulous of bearing arms are equally scrupulous of getting substitutes or paying an equivalent. Many of them would rather die than do either one or the other. But he did not see an absolute necessity for a clause of this kind. We do not live under an arbitrary government, said he, and the states respectively will have the government of the militia, unless when called into actual service. Beside, it would not do to alter it so as to exclude the whole of any sect, because there are men amongst the Quakers who will turn out, notwithstanding the religious principles of the society, and defend the cause of their country. Certainly it will be improper to prevent the exercise of such favorable dispositions, at least while it is the practice of nations to determine their contests by the slaughter of their citizens and subjects. Mr. Vining hoped the clause would be suffered to remain as it stood, because he saw no use in it if it was amended so as to compel a man to find a substitute, which, with respect to the government, was the same as if a person turned himself out to fight. Mr. Stone inquired what the words religiously scrupulous had reference to. Was it of bearing arms? If it was, it ought so to be expressed. Mr. Benson moved to have the words, but no person religiously scrupulous shall be compelled to bear arms, struck out. He would always leave it to the benevolence of the legislature, for modify it, says he, as you please, it will be impossible to express it in such a manner as to clear it from ambiguity. No man can claim this indulgence of right, and therefore ought to be left to the discretion of the government. If this stands part of the Constitution, it will be a question before the judiciary on every regulation you make with respect to the organization of the militia, whether it comports with this declaration or not. It is extremely injudicious to intermix matter of doubt with fundamentals. I have no reason to believe, but the legislature will always possess humanity enough to indulge this class of citizens in a matter they are so desirous of, but they ought to be left to their discretion. The Gazette of the United States, 22 August 1789. Mr. Scott objected to the clause in the Sixth Amendment, "No person religiously scrupulous shall be compelled to bear arms." He said if this becomes part of the Constitution, we can neither call upon such persons for service nor an equivalent. It is attended with still further difficulties, for you can never depend upon your militia. This will lead to the violation of another article of the Constitution, which secures to the people the right of keeping arms, as in this case you must have recourse to a standing army. I conceive it is a matter of legislative right altogether. I know there are many sects religiously scrupulous in this respect. I am not for abridging them of any indulgence by law. My design is to guard against those who are of no religion. It is said that religion is on the decline. If this is the case, it is an argument in my favor, for when the time comes that there is no religion, persons will more generally have recourse to these pretexts to get excused. Mr. Boudnoit said that the provision in the clause or something like it appeared to be necessary. What dependence can be placed in men who are conscientious in this respect? Or what justice can there be in compelling them to bear arms when, if they are honest men, they would rather die than use them? He then adverted to several instances of oppression in the case which occurred during the Revolutionary War. In forming a militia, we ought to calculate for an effectual defense, and not compel characters of this description to bear arms. I wish that in establishing this government we may be careful to let every person know that we will not interfere with any person's particular religious profession. If we strike out this clause, we shall lead such persons to conclude that we mean to compel them to bear arms. Mr. Vining and Mr. Jackson spoke upon the question. The words "in person" were added after the word "arms," and the amendment was adopted. Letters. Fisher Ames to Thomas Dwight, 11 June 1789. Mr. Madison had introduced his long-expected amendments. They are the fruit of much labor and research. He has hunted up all the grievances and complaints of newspapers, all the articles of conventions, and the small talk of their debates. It contains a Bill of Rights, the right of enjoying property, of changing the government at pleasure, freedom of the press, of conscience, of juries, exemption from general warrants, gradual increase of representatives till the whole number at the rate of 1 to every 30,000 shall amount to, and allowing 2 to every state. At least this is the substance. There is too much of it. Oh, I had forgot. The right of the people to bear arms. Risum teneatis amici. Could you forbear the laughter of a friend? Upon the whole, it may do good towards quieting men who attend to sounds only, and may get the mover some popularity which he wishes. John Randolph to St. George Tucker, 11 September 1789. A majority of the Senate were for not allowing the militia arms, and if 2/3 had agreed, it would have been an amendment to the Constitution. They are afraid that the citizens will stop their full career to tyranny and oppression. Samuel Nassoun to George Thatcher, 9 July 1789. I find that amendments are once again on the carpet. I hope that such may take place as will be for the best interest of the whole. A Bill of Rights well secured, that we the people may know how far we may proceed in every department, then there will be no dispute between the people and rulers, in that may be secured the right to keep arms for common and extraordinary occasions, such as secure ourselves against the wild beast, and also to amuse us by fowling, and for our defense against a common enemy. You know, to learn the use of arms is all that can save us from a foreign foe that may attempt to subdue us, for if we keep up the use of arms and become well acquainted with them, we shall always be able to look them in the face that rise up against you. For it is impossible to support a standing army large enough to guard our lengthy sea coast. And now spare me on the subject of standing armies in a time of peace. They always was first or last the downfall of all free governments. It was by their help Caesar made proud Rome own a tyrant and a traitor for a master. Conclusion. In conclusion, we can only find a few issues dealt with by the delegates on the subject of the Second Amendment, such as 1. The issue that drew most of the attention of the delegates, along with the most time afforded in the debates themselves, was that of conscientious objectors. The biased desire for some delegates to go out of their way for the religious, while in the same moment of debate we find the very disrespectful and hateful language towards atheists and are those of us who are of no religion at all. 2. The basic clause, a well-regulated militia, appeared to take hold from its beginning in Virginia, as many state constitutions also followed the Virginia style of constitution writing, and each adopted their own style of the clause until the federal constitution came along, and they did the same there too, adopted Virginia's clause. Number 3. The state governments are a byproduct of the people, and it's where we the people exist literally. Therefore, that's where all gun laws respecting private gun ownership has always existed, always belonged, and always should belong. There was never any power of gun oversight or granting of gun rights by the federal government by the adoption of the Second Amendment, just as there was never any before the amendment. Therefore, the people's free exercise of gun rights is exclusively a state/citizen issue, not a federal issue. This issue eventually became perverted by the government under the authority of another generation down the road with a thing called incorporation. That was my grandparents' generation. Okay, what you're looking at here is a chart taken from another work where I'm showing the creation of the Bill of Rights and the creation of the First Amendment. Here's the language that started it all. It was Virginia Declaration of Rights, and for this subject, the Second Amendment would be the well-regulated militia and trained to arms that you see in the Virginia Declaration of Rights. Madison took that language and put it in his resolutions and changed the words well-regulated militia keep and bear arms. And then the federal constitution, the final version, shows the well-regulated militia keep and bear arms was it made it all the way through. So this is just a depiction of the list of rights that we had started with in Virginia, and how many of them made it to the Federal Bill of Rights. Virtually most of them, especially the ones between the Fourth and the Eighth Amendment.
Yes,